Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Yes, we're live on the internet again. We seem to be making a habit of this.
Yeah.
So,
Bad habit we've got. Just turning up.
and we've just broken our own rule as well on the grounds that we were going to a 1 month thing, and then we didn't get through much of this, so we're going to do part 2 a little bit earlier. So, welcome.
We don't like to conform, do we? Even to our own rules.
No,
Never.
We like to break our own rules. Yeah.
Rebels to the last.
Actually, as people join us, we were just talking about the Beagle news, weren't we? You know, this thing about it's interesting. I think it's been described as rescued, not liberated, which is interesting. And they also used a new name, was it? Animal liberation? No, animal. What was it? Something. It wasn't
animal cruelty activist. Oh no, animal free. Do you mean the actual group names or
what they call themselves? Yeah, I know.
Animal
that
freedom.
Yeah, some papers call them the animal cruelty campaigners.
That's a new one.
Yeah. What I really think there on that one is that the first thing they should do is get onto those journalists and say that's wrong, so they don't repeat it. You know, that needs to be done. That's what a press office could do. You know, that's the kind of thing. So,
from what I saw, they have an Instagram profile that people can follow and learn about the news. And I was very excited this morning when I read the first post about it. I was pretty.
Yeah. It was almost like rather than an ALF, it was more like a NAL thing or a Liberation League thing in the sense that there was an occupation. But it, you know, so I suppose it was a little bit like Operation Valentine, which was a kind of a weird kind of daylight ALF thing with now overtones and a lot of damage of animals liberated and then people arrested. So, you know, it wasn't the creeping about in the night type issue. You know?
No.
for all those
definitely.
interested, there's a podcast series called Radicals and Revolutionaries, and certainly the early part of that, the first half of that, is all about the ALF and the Animal Liberation Leagues. So that's interesting for people to watch if you want to. Anyway, that's not what we're here for. So who have we got? Amber, Jonah got in about 2 hours ago, but I don't know whether they're still here. Amber's here. Maz the Gob, Deb. Hello, Deb. Michael and Joanna.
Hey, everyone.
Hello, indeed. Right.
We are here to talk about the trauma of being vegan in a non-vegan world, but since this trauma can lead to real psychological trauma, we just want to make clear that we're not mental health professionals. So if people in the audience...
I'm a doctor.
a different kind of doctor. So if people feel that their mental health is at risk, that they don't cope, please find the help you need. There is no shame in that, and sometimes it's absolutely necessary in order to be okay again and able to fight for the cause.
Yeah, good advice. I think.
Well said, Nella.
Yes, we'd all agree. So I'm just going to give you a little rundown for those people who didn't see part 1 of this. What we're basically doing is we got little clips, or fairly short clips, from a video that Casey Taft filmed. Casey Taft is a professional psychologist, but also a vegan, and runs, or at least is very prominent in vegan publishers. So you can find them on Facebook and elsewhere. And a couple of years ago, he did this really good video about trauma. You know, what we're talking about, being vegan in a non-vegan world. And so we split it up into 12 parts, and we got through half of it. So first of all, Casey started talking about the definition of trauma within the psychological community. Then he talked about his own definition, which he thinks is an improvement, because it talks about psychological and childhood violence, and he thinks that's very important. The third point is that he was talking in terms of animal advocates, in terms of animal use and animal rights violations, animal abuse, whatever you want to call it. It's kind of everywhere. You can't turn on the TV. It's in all the adverts, and of course, it's in the children's books. Although, thankfully, the last couple of years there's been a big increase in vegan-related books, which is quite good. He then talked about racism, sexism, and other violence, these kind of intersectional issues that might affect animal advocates. He talked about psychological abuse from loved ones, and there's been a lot of talk in the movement about the difficulty of talking to your own family. And I don't know whether you, Wendy and Nella, noticed this, but I still see a lot of people very distressed because they've come into the movement and they still are very distressed because they can't get through to their own kind of family, and it really gets to them. And of course, we can say, well, there's reasons for that, but it still is very painful for them because it's almost like the people I'm the closest with, I can't make any headway with. I think that is quite difficult. I still see that. There's YouTubes about it recently. There's still people on social media saying that kind of stuff.
It creates that dissonance, doesn't it? That you see things differently all of a sudden, and you see the world and you see what's going on and all this violence and the violations that are going on and the plight of other animals. And then you see the people that you care about and that you love and that, you have this kind of relationship with, all of a sudden you see them in a different light as well, because suddenly they're the people who are complicit in that as well. And there's like this dissonance of like, I really care about this person, but they don't understand what's going on, and they're not willing to change. So therefore they are part of this violence. And I think it creates such turmoil for us.
I think part of it is the fact that they start to care less about their relatives than they did previously, and they find that distressing, I think, because it's as though they feel let down. I think, I thought that if I come to you with this information, as it were, you wouldn't respond the way you have, which is dismissive or whatever.
Yeah.
But also is the fact that people that used to understand you, they don't anymore, especially friends and family, if one is in good terms with their family. The people that you needed to explain things and they would get you before, they don't now. So that's a different kind of isolation. People feel alone.
It drives a wedge between members of the family, doesn't it?
Yeah. You feel like you don't fit in anymore. And part of our drive as humans is that connection and fitting in, isn't it? And belonging to the group and the community and family. And you just feel you don't fit in.
Yeah,
you're different. All of a sudden you feel like an outsider.
Yeah, I raised the issue of being vegan in a non-vegan world on the Skyjack Morgan. He's been going for about a month now. He's got a new morning show, which is 4 p.m. for us, but it's morning for him because he's in North America. And the panel was talking about it a little bit. And one person was saying that they almost felt the need to give up veganism to try and save their relationship, with their family. And then they thought, well, no, because it is the right thing to do. But it just creates that moral dilemma then, doesn't it? The fact, who are you going to sacrifice? Are you going to continue to sacrifice the other animals? Or are you going to risk sacrificing your relationships with your family, And then finally, we talked about shame within the animal advocacy community and what effect that could have. That was the last thing we dealt with. So we're just about ready to do the rest. I'm going to post the link because this is an open mic session. So if you want to join us, if you copy.
Excuse me for 1 second. I can still hear, but I've just got to find my phone because it keeps ringing. Sorry, folks.
Somebody's left us.
I'm still here. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can. Yes. Okay. So right. So Casey Taft. So the first one he talks about is he gets on to talking about PTSD and the most relevant parts of that kind of research into that for animal advocates. And he talks, as you'll see, it's a small clip, but he talks about the fact that people might have nightmares, people might have memories that they don't want to have, and they might relive trauma, like, for example, going to a save type event and be traumatized by it and then relive that over and over. And also he says that in the discipline that you sometimes get flashbacks, which apparently is the most severe. And one question that I want to ask about that is, I wonder whether it was different. Well, was it different with this beagle rescue? But also, was it different in the earlier days of, say, the ALF? Because the flashbacks you got was of good things, like liberating other animals, not just watching them going into slaughterhouses. And I think a lot of vegans of a certain standing are a little bit worried about the psychological effect of now you go fairly regularly and just watch them going in, and there's no possibility of rescuing them. So I tend to think that can't be good, right?
I have 2 points on that, Roger. One is a question: what about when ALF goes about to liberate individuals? Could they liberate all the individuals in a laboratory or a farm, or they had to leave individuals behind? Because if you do have to leave individuals behind, then you may have the flashback of the whole,
Yes.
torturous situation.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I was going to say that, because that's the downside of it. I always make the point is that towards the end of the of the kind of big peak in ALF stuff in the late 80s, I suppose, is that you had like 56 homes for battery hens or broiler chickens, and you go into a massive barn and there's thousands of them, and you end up playing God then, because you're choosing who is going to live and who is not. And it's kind of not as though you had time to go through the place to try and say, well, this one's not going to survive, so better to rescue him or her now. You tended to have to do it fairly quickly, and so that meant it was a bit random. And I think you're right about that. So it's two sides of the one coin. You can feel great about what you've done, and then you feel terrible about who you've left.
And since you mentioned the save type actions, like vigils, there is a lot of talk about vigils and the psychological strain, but also I think Laurie Gruen mentions that in her books. Outside the slaughterhouse, during a save action, a space is created where animal rights activists can actually mourn, where it is okay to cry or to mourn about other animals and what is happening to them, not at that particular moment, but on a universal level every day. Because usually when you go through your day, you go to the supermarket, you see the bodies of other animals. You don't cry in the supermarket. We manage, to live our lives somehow. And sometimes activists don't have the space to mourn, and outside the slaughterhouse is where it is accepted to cry, it is accepted to, to scream, to do whatever you feel like.
That's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I suppose the save, for example, will give you a public space where you could do that, whereas, like you say, a supermarket isn't. In fact, it's weird, wasn't it, if vegans went into supermarkets and did do that, and what effect that would have. It's hard to say, isn't it? There you go.
It's the same for other emotions as well, isn't it? Like if you go to a protest, a particular type of protest, you might get the chance to let out anger, because often I think we get a lot of anger, but we are not good at expressing anger. I think our society doesn't allow space for us to express anger. We're not really sort of set up to regulate that emotion that well. So it's quite cathartic sometimes when you do go to protests, that you can let out this anger and this sorrow or this grief, whatever it is, similar to the vigils. And I think it does give you that opportunity to do that, where we're suppressing so much all of the time. I think that's what sort of really exacerbates our trauma, isn't it? But we get to let that out. But then I also wonder on the other side of that, because I know I found this myself, if I've gone really regularly to like a lot of protests within a short space of time, anger almost then becomes the default, and then you start getting into something I know we're going to chat about a little bit later, in that hatred of humans and like just seeing the darker side. And you almost, I think that letting out the anger and being in that zone can then perpetuate your anger if it's too often and too much. That's been my experience anyway. I've found myself getting sucked into that.
And we've got several two sides of one coin popping up, haven't we? Which is interesting. So should
the yin and yang. It's always like that, isn't it?
Yeah. Black and white. Are we gonna? Should we start off with this? Shall we go?
Yes.
Go duck. Go.
Yeah. So this is the PTSD bit, which is relevant to animal advocacy. Then, so here we go.
Because for most people, when they experience trauma, they don't necessarily develop PTSD. They don't necessarily develop a psychiatric diagnosis. But trauma can affect folks in a variety of ways, even if you don't develop PTSD, right? It affects the way that you view the world. So it's important to think about that. But it's also important to consider the role of PTSD, because PTSD can be a pretty devastating problem to have as well. So I'm not going to go through all the symptoms of PTSD, but just in a nutshell, there are 3 main symptom groupings of PTSD. The first is re-experiencing, and that involves reliving the incident. So through nightmares, through having traumatic memories recur again and again when you don't want to be having them. It's constantly reliving the trauma in various ways. You can't get it out of your head. You're constantly going over it in your mind. Or even when you try to push it back and you try to avoid it, it still comes out in your dreams, or it comes out in other places. At the more extreme level, it comes out as flashbacks. Then there's avoidance and numbing symptoms. And these are symptoms such as avoiding discussing trauma, avoiding anything that reminds you of the trauma. Numbing symptoms involve having difficulties expressing or identifying your feelings. Just expressing no feelings at all, just feeling completely disconnected and numbed out. You don't have any connection to other people. Then you have the hyperarousal symptoms. And these are symptoms that reflect an overactive fight or flight response. So basically, having the heightened sense of vigilance. It's called hypervigilance, when you're constantly feeling on edge, or you're constantly feeling like somebody might be likely to do harm to you.
Right, so there's kind of all flavors of animal advocacy there, isn't there? Because you've got the kind of, I was really interested in what he said about avoidance, and I was wondering, we've got this pejorative term about cupcake vegans and all that kind of stuff, but maybe a lot of people are like that. They've gone into it to a degree that they've become traumatized, and their way of dealing with it, and especially if they've had problems with their family, is to then not talk about it. Because I've always asked over the years, is there such a thing as a silent vegan? I don't know any, but there must be, and yet you think that's a kind of interesting position, isn't it? That do you think there is anybody that won't talk about why they're vegan, or won't, as it were, make an argument if somebody asks them a question, for example?
I imagine there are people that would say, for example, that they are vegan for health reasons, while they are not, or that they are fasting or things like that.
I know.
They've been bullied, for example.
Sorry, Nella.
Go ahead, Wendy.
No, sorry, I didn't realize you hadn't finished.
No, I'm finished.
And I was just going to say, I know some who are very much vegan animal rights people, but personality-wise, they're kind of more withdrawn, more introvert, shy, and struggle to talk about why they're vegan, and struggle to even get into those conversations. So they tend to not really socialize that much with non-vegans at all, and even don't bring it up, and just kind of, I'd say they are quiet vegans, but they're not vegans for health. But it's just a personality thing.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing about Ronnie Lee's position on that is that he suggests that there's activism for everybody. So if you are like that, you could do things like door dropping and the kind of things that don't involve you talking to people. It's just a question of passing on information literally through people's doors, and then you're gone, as it were. So that would be one way of dealing with that. And I suppose the activist community probably is, in a sense, needs to understand that there are some people who can't do what a lot of people can do. And you shouldn't. It's a little bit like, that thing about, I found it easy to go vegan. It's always a bit of a mistake to think, therefore, that can be extrapolated to everybody else. Because, other people have got other problems, other places in the world they're living, food deserts and all that. But then you've got that family thing and all that kind of stuff. And so, people's situation can be radically different from yours. So we shouldn't assume, should we really?
No, we shouldn't. And I agree with Ronnie that there is something for everyone. But the thing is, you need to be within some vegan or activist community in order to find your thing. For example, someone could volunteer, I don't know, maybe a graphic designer could, volunteer his skills for an organization, for example, for an animal rights group. But the thing is, if you are not in the community, you are not aware of all the different choices you may have. And these may be people that, as Wendy said, they don't socialize with other vegans in order to avoid the topic, or maybe even avoiding, the same conversations again and again that may be painful.
Oh, well, this one is
sneaky activism. I love that.
It's going to be sneaky, and I think to be honest, that's probably relevant for everybody, because the main theme here is the fact that we're in a deeply, deeply speciesist society. Cultural speciesism is everywhere, and it is a weight on us. It's not an easy thing. The easiest thing to do, even sociologically, is swim with the tide, which is not what vegans do. We're trying to get the juggernaut of speciesism and turn it around. The easiest thing for us to do is not do what we're all doing now, either in the audience or in the panel. Just we might as well, I don't know, go and watch the new Tom Hanks film, or what's the other one? The other guy, the other Tom.
Oh, Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
Tom Hardy.
Yeah. Go and watch one of those must-see Hollywood blockbusters, kind of thing.
I'm reading All Animals Lives Matter comment, and that's very true. We all should be aware of our mental health issues and be careful, because there is this kind of mentality in the movement that we should not pay that much attention to what's happening to us, because the other animals are suffering right now and they are getting murdered and whatever. So we should not be that sensible or whatever. But mental health issues are not a joke, and we should take them seriously always. Our mental health problems, other people's mental health problems, we should always deal with them very carefully, and we should encourage people ask help and get help for ourselves if we need it.
And also,
there is this, Wendy, there is this thing in the movement that we should get tough or tougher. And
that's what I was about to say.
Yeah, get on with it.
Yeah. The same thing. Yeah. And actually, because I really recommend this book, by the way, Patrice Jones, Aftershock. It's all about what we're talking about.
Recommending a book in the 21st century, you devil, you.
Yeah, and it's also available in audio format.
Yeah, this is an audio. Patrice's books are all available in audio. And actually, Patrice says one of the myths of human superiority is that we can transcend our feelings while other animals are bound by theirs. And this goes along with the idea that we can and should supersede our bodies while animals are always bound to theirs. So actually, she talks about how the fact that we kind of think we should be able to get on with it is because we create that human superiority and we distance ourselves from our animality and our animal bodies. Like, we can't escape our feelings and what happens in our bodies when we get trauma and stress. It's just part of who we are. But we kind of think like, oh no, I should be able to just like crack on, and like, you know, the other animals are suffering much more, but it doesn't work like that. So I really recommend this book because it deals with all of that stuff.
Who does the audio of her books, Wendy?
Good question. It's not Patrice herself.
Oh, right.
I can't remember. Can you remember that? I'd have to look that up in my little library. I'll come back to you with that in a second.
I can't imagine a more difficult. I mean, I'm actually terrible at reading aloud personally, but it's always been a big.
I think they are professional actors.
Yeah,
To do that.
Yeah, voiceover.
Stephen Fry or something like that. Yeah. What do we think of Deb's point here about almost kind of see, in some ways, people who do this, and I think it is the case, they're almost like not telling people what veganism is, you know, because they're kind of minimizing it in order not to make it such a big deal, presumably in terms of interaction. I mean, I think that's what's been.
Can you hear?
No, I cannot hear Roger.
Roger, we can't hear you.
Okay, for some reason.
You're back.
Yeah.
Back in the room.
I muted myself somehow, but I don't know how I did it. I think I was just doing this. I've got magical powers I didn't even know about.
I like this. I like this bit. Woo.
Yeah. So what do you think of this?
It's true. It happens. It happens a lot.
So, I mean, it's defensive for the vegan, right? But not too helpful in terms of propounding veganism in a way.
For jobs such as.
But the thing is, if you are a vegan, for an introvert or for whatever reason, you cannot confront others, even in a polite and civilized way. Should you do it? I mean, or if you know that people in your I don't know family will bully you, for example, and you know that you cannot take it. Should you do it? Because sometimes we go into survival mode.
Yeah, I got language point though, because are we confronting people, or equally problematic perhaps is, are we educating people? Because that kind of implies a power relation. You know, I'm the one with the knowledge and you're the one who I'm imparting it to, and this kind of stuff. So, or are we just being humans talking to each other?
I think that it's too loaded to be just humans talking to each other.
It's too loaded.
Yes.
No, okay.
And I suppose it depends on the context of that conversation as well, doesn't it? Who it's with. Have they asked for information from you, or are you imparting it just from your, you know, off your own back kind of thing? I suppose it's contextual.
Well, funny enough, this leads into what Casey says next, which is style of the way we put ourselves over. You know, is it confrontational or is it educational or whatever? I think all that is implied by this bit. Let's see this bit.
This is not thrown together, Roger. There's smooth links here.
This whole idea of trauma and anger and survival mode is misanthropy, right? So misanthropy is essentially a hatred of humans or a dislike of humans. So this is a quote. This is from my book Millennial Vegan. A quote that I use. It says, "I don't care if what I say offends humans, because the animal holocaust is the worst atrocity this planet has ever seen. Screw humans and their feelings. I only care about the animals." How many of you have ever said something like this? Raise your hand if you've ever said anything like that. How many of you have heard other people say something like this? So, okay, we all know. When we're misanthropic, it's going to be hard for us to reach non-vegans, right? like you get a non-vegan who eats cheese, and you'd be like, well, you're like killing baby cows, and you're raping their moms. Like, you might as well just go and kill yourself, right? Like, how is that going to get that person any closer to going vegan, right? So it can be harmful to our advocacy in various ways, because if we want to be effective advocates, we have to find something to connect with that other person to help bring them along in terms of changing their behavior. It also doesn't bring movements together. It doesn't bring in other social justice movements. When we say, I don't care about your problem, I don't care about your oppression, I don't care about the injustice you experience, I only care about non-human animals. Basically, we're telling like large groups of people, I don't care about you, I don't want to join with you, and I'm also, by the way, I'm a hypocrite, because I claim to care about social justice, but I only care about this one little component of social justice. Well, it's not little, I only care about the one aspect of social justice and not others.
Right, so there's a heck of a lot in that. So what do we think of that? I mean, what always strikes me, a couple of things, is when vegans say on social media, I hate humans, or humans are vile, this kind of thing, I always write, you mean the vegans as well? Because, and that ties to the second point, which is a lot of people who have come to dislike humans so much that they hate them, they often say things like, it's not about you, it's about them, and it's not our movement, it's their movement, meaning the other animals. And frankly, that's not true. It's our movement. The population of the vegan movement is made up of human beings. The other animals are the subject of this social movement, which is populated by humans. And so if we've got a situation where we literally hate humans now, how are we going to talk to them in a way that could say, join us, essentially, right?
Yeah,
I understand frustration is normal. I mean, we've all been there. We've all said these things, at least privately.
Yeah.
But I think
that's useful, privately rather than publicly.
Yeah, but when misanthropy becomes an ideology of sorts, it's non-effective. It's non-effective because we cannot convince others first, and it's non-effective because, as Taft said, then we are dealing only with one kind of injustice, the one that happens to other animals, and we deny every other kind of injustice that humans experience, and also, in a way, we deny the link between all these oppressions.
Yeah, and I think what it does as well, it kind of, again, going back to this separation of, we have this kind of fake or false human constructed separation between humans and other animals. We have this divide. And I think when we start getting into that misanthropic frame of mind, is we exacerbate that divide. That's creating all the problems in the first place, because if we didn't have this divide, we wouldn't have this hierarchy and this, all other animals are beneath us and we're separate from them. And this exacerbates that divide, because we're going, well, we love other animals, but we hate humans. It's still part of that same divide. It's just the other way around, if that makes sense. And another thing that I've been wondering about this whole misanthropy, I don't even know if I'm saying that right, misanthropy. But I just wondered, does it lead to self-loathing as well? And self-loathing is part of so many mental health issues. It's that negative view of the self-critic, negative self-talk, negative view of the world, negative view or hopelessness about the future. I think that feeds into the whole depression and trauma and that mental health issues as well, is because we are humans. So if we hate all humans, it kind of, I think, somehow leads to some kind of self-loathing, which could be problematic as well. I'm just being curious about that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, there is a very famous case of someone who hates humans, including themselves, and and they were very influential, still are in some circles. So, what kind of good does it do just on a tactical level? I like following what Nella said. If you feel that way, and you can't blame people half the time for doing that, but at least just keep it within your own circle and don't kind of broadcast it, as it were, because that is not functional. It doesn't do any good. You know, I mean, like we're talking about bringing about a vegan world, which means that in the future we're thinking that a lot of people who are now not vegan. I mean, we've got phrases like pre-vegan, right? There's a lot of people who are now not vegan who we're expecting to become vegan in the future. You know, unless we've got so pessimistic that we've kind of got every vegan there is. And I always ask people like that, do you think there are more ethical vegans out there? And they always say yes. And so I think that defeats their position then. Because if there are, we've got to go and get them.
And also, it's a very dark place, misanthropy. Because if you hate other humans, and that means that you cannot socialize, or at least you cannot socialize with other people, except I don't know, probably a very small group of like-minded vegans, and that can lead to all kinds of mental health issues, like this kind of isolation and you know, seeing everything as black and believing that we are doomed because, you know,
we're all doomed.
Humans are the problem. Humans are the virus. Yes.
Yeah. And also, if you haven't got that hopefulness, if you have no space for hope, then surely we wouldn't do anything, because surely activism comes from hope for a different future. Surely that's what we're all about, isn't it? Where we believe that we can make a different future, we can change, we can affect change. And that comes from a place of hope, doesn't it? Whereas saying that we hate all humans is basically helpless and hopeless. And that, like, well, if humans are like this, then what's the point? We're never going to change them all. We're never going to get anywhere. So it's kind of a little bit of a paradox in a way.
I know vegans who will say that. They'll say that and just go, well, we'll never get a vegan world. I mean, a lot of the more optimistic ones, like Tom Reagan, for example, would say, in my lifetime. But I mean, some people just think we'll never do it. It's a waste of time. And I think then you just end up with despair. And of course, what that does structurally is that's why we're always sliding into welfare, because we can't do what we really want. And so let's try and do some of the things we don't really want, but we might be able to do. You know, it comes back to that. I posted the link, by the way, again. If anybody wants to join us, this is an open mic session. Just
yes.
Link. But Wendy and Nella, what do you think of this? What does this conversation mean about things like the Liberation Pledge? Because I'm in really 2 or 3 minds about the Liberation Pledge.
I'm in 5 minds about it.
Okay, I had a conversation about the Liberation Pledge with my therapist earlier today, just before joining you. Is there an expert you want to play first, or we can talk about this, the Liberation Pledge? I mean. No,
I think we can talk about it now. I think because I think the next thing that Katie says is that misanthropy is not good for us. I mean, do you want me to play that bit first?
Oh, you can do that. Yes.
Okay.
It's also not good for us, right? When we're carrying around all that anger, when we're carrying around these kinds of thoughts, it's going to lead to a lot of other problems. And I'll talk about that. Actually, I'll talk about that now. It can contribute to depression, and I think having that misanthropic point of view, it really to me is kind of a depressogenic way of thinking, right? So you definitely have negative views of the world, right? People are terrible. Negative views of self. So when we're exposed to trauma, we often, like I talked about, we often have self-esteem problems. So thoughts such as I'm worthless. And negative views of the future, often when we're exposed to a lot of trauma, where we feel like things will never change. So a lot of animal advocates I know say these very things. They really, have low self-esteem. They have negative views of the world, and negative views of the future, and that's really a recipe for major depression, right?
Look, we're going to start getting to positive things in a minute, folks. But I've got to put this one up though. Wendy 5 Minds McGovern. So, Liberation Pledge then, Nella.
Oh, okay. I took the Liberation Pledge a few years back. I haven't sat at a table where other animals have been served for about 5 years. I had this conversation. Sometimes it was very difficult to navigate, the situations with friends, family, parties, co-workers, whatever. I did it every time, no matter what. And today I was talking to my therapist, and he was saying to me that obviously this is something difficult to do. It is in some cases, but he then said something that I don't know, shocked me. He said, "And why do you think that this is effective?" And my point was that if uh, I am at a table with a person who eats other animals and say nothing and do nothing about it, I normalize the consumption of other animals' bodies, which I believe it's true. But if I simply, his point was that if I simply am not there, I do nothing. That this is not an effective tactic. And he actually said that the best case scenario from his point of view as a psychiatrist, having in mind how we can convince other people that we should not be aggressive, we should be there, we should lead by example and say something like a phrase, not throw a whole book at the other person while they are eating. But say something.
You're being asked if the therapist is vegan.
No, he's not. He's not. But he said today, he said the phrase like, so you are worried if some of your friends, while you are out, orders to eat something. And I said they won't be eating something. They will be eating someone. And he said, okay, that phrase is enough because now I cannot go back at my place and eat meat. So he said that this phrase did it for him.
All right, okay. And if you weren't there, that wouldn't have been heard, I suppose. One thing you said, Nella, which is really interesting, you were saying that if you sit down with them, you normalize, speciesist attitudes, particularly kind of meat eating, perhaps, or consumption of products derived from other animals. But I don't think you do that because that's already normalized. And the way it came in, I mean, I remember somebody in the 1980s, a very successful playwright. He said that, if I wouldn't sit down with somebody who was the maker of child porn, especially if they were, as it were, consuming it on their, computer right there either. And I was thinking, yeah, but if you're in a society where everybody did that, like everybody eats their animals, then you'd be in a different situation because it would be the norm then. And so, you're kind of, you're there to challenge, but you can't kind of add to the normalization of it because it's already the norm, isn't it?
Yes, but I use this scenario trying to explain to him. Let's say that you have a coworker that makes homophobic comments all the time. If no one challenges him, like homophobic comments and jokes become the norm. They are the norm, but anyway. But if every time they open their mouth to make a homophobic comment, someone says something, they will probably stop doing it because it won't be the normal thing to do anymore. When 1, 2, 3, 5 people react to that, it would not be as normal anymore.
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree with that. It's obviously a process, but somebody has to start it, and the person who starts it is the one challenging everyone else, and then someone else joins, and then the balance switches. I mean, that's what you're saying. But I mean, the process has to start
somewhere. But with the liberation pledge, it's not always possible for vegans to do it. I understand that I was somehow privileged being able to make that decision for myself because I work from home. I don't have co-workers. I don't go to an office space every day where other people eat and drink. I don't have to go out with co-workers. I don't have family I mean children. So I don't have to go to children's parties, for example. I mean, I think that the whole thing about the liberation pledge is too hard on some vegans who feel that they should do it but they cannot do it because it depends a lot on your situation.
Yeah, when my kids were young, there was a big push against having children in those days, and ironically, a few years later, vegans were having loads of children, but there was a big push against it in my day, as it were. So it would have been difficult there, in terms of going to school functions, that kind of stuff. Which ironically, we did make loads of vegan, sausage rolls, that kind of stuff. And the usual thing is that they were the first to go. It's remarkable situation. I've been to a wedding which was half a vegan thing and half, and all the vegan stuff had gone, and yet there was all kinds of corpse parts being left on the other side of it. Even at the university, the staff, when we had staff meetings, they had a great deal of difficulty catering for me, not because they couldn't cater for me, it's because they couldn't get everybody else not to eat it all before I got there.
That's happened to me so many times as well. Like the vegan stuff just goes, and then you're left without food because everyone's going, "Oh, that was nice," and great, thanks. But I tend to
start putting Roger's food on.
I tend to agree with what Mike.
Go ahead, Wendy. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just saying this comment on here. I tend to agree with what Michael was saying, but I've got that little. Oh, there we go. The situation is key to whether the Liberation Pledge can be adhered to. I think I tend to look at each situation individually, like you were saying. Now, there's sometimes you are able to choose not to sit down with certain people and consume other animals and the products of violation and all of that stuff. Sometimes you're able to do that, and sometimes it's a very difficult situation that you might find yourself in, that you just cannot, it's a very difficult you might be with people who, it could be part of your job, or you could face losing your job, or it could be family, difficult family situations, anything like that. I tend to try and navigate it situation by situation and do my absolute best in each context. And I think it's very easy to put shame and say, well, I think we should always do something this way, and then put shame onto other vegans because they don't. And I think we ought to be careful, because I think by creating absolutes, we can create situations again for shame, and shame is a big part of trauma. So I think we should be mindful of not exacerbating others' trauma by making things absolute in what vegans ought to always do in every situation, and be mindful of context.
Bit of flexibility. I mean, I had a really interesting one. You'll remember probably that I took part in something called Eating with the Enemy, and I had to have a meal with a dairy farmer, but it was during the pandemic, and so we were kind of almost like across the room from one another. It's just that they filmed it to make it look as though we were closer, right? And so I decided to do it on that basis. If we'd have actually been just across a normal table, I'm not quite sure if I could have, or I would have wanted to do it as much. But, I felt it was the right thing to do, and also scored a few points as well, because one reason I did it was the fact that if I don't do it, some welfarists will do it and then start, and all that. And so that was the case-by-case situation. I'm not sure if I do it each and every time, in other words, depending on the circumstances.
And I think that no matter what, people should not feel guilty if they want to do something but that they are not able to do. I know that recently I felt guilty because someone consumed animal parts in my presence. We're not at the same table. I was not eating. Sometimes you cannot just kick people out from where they are. And still, I felt guilty afterwards. And I had to talk to Wendy about it to feel better and stop thinking about it.
Yeah, it's a tough one, because, like I say, I'm a bit of a fence sitter on it, because I can definitely see both sides, but I could see both sides when I did it myself, So I was kind of telling myself off a little bit, by doing it. At the same time, I think it was right to do it. So I ended up in no perfect land.
This has raised another interesting point, actually. Michael's responded to All Animals Lives Matter, because who kindly said that this was a really helpful stream. So thank you so much for saying that, and glad that we can help in some way, no matter how small. But
just an ordinary program always helps.
This is what we do. No, but Michael's saying it helps like therapy from watching other activist channels that can actually be bad for your mental health, and that's a really good point, isn't it? That actually a lot of what we're exposed to as activists, other social media channels, platforms, feeds, our news feeds, we're constantly bombarded with traumatic content, aren't we? And even other activists, it is difficult to hear some of what they're talking about, or to see the pictures, watch the video footage and all of that. And I think that's something to really bear in mind as well.
Filter that goes on though, Wendy. I think we filter it. I think that you end up knowing which ones you can, as it were, safely tune into and which ones to avoid. At least. No, not at the beginning, obviously, but But I mean, I don't think you'd go back, time after time to someone who puts it over in a way that is distressing to you.
Sometimes you
can idea that you should go back and watch everything, and watch every documentary and every new piece of footage there is out there, but this may be really, really traumatic for people.
Sometimes even just going into a group to post something, like sharing the show, for example. I went into a group earlier to just like share a reminder of the show, and the first thing that hit me was a really horrendous image that I won't describe, but that's now emblazoned on my mind. And I had no kind of warning, no choice. It was just there because I went into this group. So then I think, well, should I avoid these groups, or should I still go in there but just try and put that somewhere? But you get saturated by these images, don't you?
Yeah, some of the influencers use some really, really graphic footage, which is, distressing, I suppose. Look, we've got about 8 minutes left because we do have to finish at 7 today, folks, because we've got commitments. So Casey goes on to talk about some positive things. So I don't want to miss that out unless we're going to do a third program, which we're not. So I'll need to move on then, I think, if that's okay with everybody. Can we get rid of that comment?
Yeah, I can't find it now. Is it that one? Oh, yeah. Oh, no. Sorry.
Just changed it. Here we go.
Is that gone? Let's go.
First, we need to speak out and reach out to others. We need to make sure that we are not afraid to express our feelings. Obviously, it's a recipe for depression, for anger, for PTSD, when we hold in our feelings, when we avoid talking about what's going on with us. That's a main contributor to all of the problems that I just described, all the psychiatric problems that are related to trauma. We have to talk about our feelings to others in any way that we possibly can. We also need to label violence and abuse. We need to be aware of violence and abuse when it's happening. So, for example, psychological abuse. When somebody's being abusive to you, it's really helpful for you to recognize, this is abusive, this is not okay, and I'm not going to let you do this, right? So we have to know what abuse looks like and recognize violence and abuse so we can do something about it and minimize our exposure to that. We need to seek out others to talk to. As animal advocates, I think it's really critical that we talk to other animal advocates about what we're exposed to, what we're doing, what our struggles are. I know I have 1 or 2 other advocates I try to talk to once a week if I can, and that's really important. Just like we as clinical psychologists know the importance of talking to our co-therapists about our groups. It's the same thing, because we don't want to develop vicarious traumatization. We don't want to develop problems just from hearing story after story of violence and abuse.
That's interesting, isn't it, that one? It made me think about my TikTok things, when that thing about calling out psychological abuse, because all those kind of meat emojis that come flying in on TikTok, it's not people having a laugh, really. I mean, they're just being psychologically abusive towards you, and I think you should see it like that, And it's really interesting how social media just allows this outpouring of really nastiness from others. I mean, I get a lot of Jimmy Savile comments on TikTok, you know, and you know, I always say to them, you know, it doesn't bother me, but please don't do that, because there could be people who've had that kind of experience, you know, watching, and so, you know, have a bit of respect for others. But it's as though the idea of, you know, I mean, I suppose it's part of this big argument at the moment about wokeness and anti-wokeness and all that kind of stuff, you know, say anything, offend anybody, hurt anybody, it doesn't matter, you know, versus, hey, come on, no, let's be reasonable.
I liked all his suggestions about positive stuff we can do, and I would think that no matter what we do, being vegan in a non-vegan world is going to be traumatic for some time yet. But we should take the necessary steps or take the necessary measures to protect our mental health and well-being, and do what is necessary for us, know our limits, recognize when we are, I don't know, too tired or mentally drained, or who cannot take anymore, and have a break, ask for help, get together with other people, take positive steps. So we can feel.
I think the idea of talking to other vegans is important, because I think we forget now. We tend to think that everybody must know other vegans, but I mean, we've had it on this show, haven't we? Lots of times. I'm the only vegan in the village, as it were. You know, I'm the only vegan in my state or my county or whatever, or I don't know any other vegans. You know, this kind of thing, and you know, that's kind of a shock to me, because I know so many.
This this interests me. I know we've got to go back to that last little thing, but this I feel is something that is quite common, isn't it, in the movement for activists? It's that sense of punishing ourselves because of, probably out of guilt for when we weren't vegan, and some activists actually say, oh, it motivates me. And I was just curious about this, and I just wonder, because you don't hear about this in other social justice movements, and I just wonder, would activists in, you know, striving for, in the feminist movement, anti-racism, all of these, you know, lots of different movements, would they put themselves through traumatic footage? Or
no, but I think it is. I mean, I remember my sister, when she came out as lesbian, she'd been married and everything. I think there was a little element of that, you know, during that time, sleeping with the enemy, that type of thing. So I suppose there are versions in other movements, but we're not going to be aware of them as much, are we?
Yeah, but I wonder if, like, going back to labeling violence and abuse, is this a form of self-abuse in a way? Like, can we recognize that as, like, we're abusing ourselves because we're punishing ourselves? But actually, as much as it's understandable when we all have that definite guilt and shame around being complicit or being part of it in the past, or even just being part of the human race that's committing so many atrocities, there is that level of guilt, isn't there, for a lot of us, I think. But I suppose that is not going to change the world if we all become very self-loathing and abuse ourselves and punish ourselves. We have to kind of empower ourselves in order to be the best versions that we can be, in order to go forward and make that change.
There's an extension thing as well. Punish yourself, but also punish others for not doing that as well. I mean, I used to know somebody who kind of almost like suggested that you had to watch Earthlings once a week, otherwise you weren't doing it, kind of thing. And I thought that was ludicrous. I mean, it's so dysfunctional, anti-revolutionary. You know, to kind of put yourself through that trauma voluntarily.
And what I have to say to all the person who wrote the comment is, please don't do that. We all, or most of us, participated in the carnage at some point in our lives. You are one of the few people that became aware of what's happening to other animals, and you are actively trying to change it. So punishing yourself doesn't help you or other animals.
No,
Don't
it's
talk to
detrimental, isn't it? It's detrimental to you and to the cause as well. Like, we need to be strong, empowered individuals to make a sustainable movement going forward, definitely. And also it's always like, and especially I've learned a lot from Roger over these years, and from other
me into it. I'm not guilty, folks.
But no, through the socialization, like, really had my eyes open to the socialization process and how normalized it is, and how even from being born we are normalized into this society, that it's like we're just not aware. We're programmed, we're wired, we're conditioned into it, so that we're not aware. We just don't know any better, and so we have to kind of give ourselves a little bit of a break, once we do realize
a bit of slack, because we can see ourselves, and we can see speciesists as a victim of speciesism. They're born into a deeply culturally speciesist society. What do you expect? I used to work with a guy who came over from South Africa, and he was terribly racist in the South African way of being racist. But he didn't know any other way. He used words that we wouldn't use and stuff, and eventually he had to go through a process of change. But at first he was just reflecting. We're like mirrors of our own culture, and again, it's easier to just fall into conformity. And most people, sociologically, most people are conformists, which is a shame in a way. Even people who are rebellious, they tend to be rather conformist in terms of core values underneath. You scratch the surface and there's not much there, kind of thing. So we're dealing with all that as well.
Yeah. There was another comment from I know we've got to probably finish soon, haven't we?
Yeah. Nella, do you really have to go now, or
I can say for a few minutes.
2 minutes? Yeah, I saw that as well, Wendy, because it really speaks to me, because this is happening to me right now. I'm in the process of moving to one of these.
Into community. I know that must be. Yeah, it's a shame that we haven't had anyone on our open mic today, have we? That's a shame. No one wants to come.
I hate being old. I just can't cope with the idea that I'm old.
Loneliness.
My football friends, I'm moving into a place for the elderly, and say, well, that's because you're old. And I say, thanks a lot. I just it doesn't register that I'm my age at all.
No, we never feel our age, do we? It's just like a number that we say, and when you hear yourself say it, you're like, what? It's not. You feel the same inside your whole life, pretty much.
I do that to myself. I say my age to myself, and I think, no, it can't be.
It can't be right. Yeah, no, that's really difficult, isn't it? Canadian vegan forever, the only vegans in the community of 500 seniors. Loneliness is really difficult to deal with, isn't it? And I wonder if there are places like I don't know if there are places local to you where other vegans hang out, or are there groups online, maybe Facebook groups, if that's your thing, Facebook communities or anything. Is there anywhere other than your immediate environment where you could connect? I mean, places like this, I guess. Like this is a good place to kind of.
You've got each other too. I mean, it would be.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be worse, wouldn't it, to live with someone who is not vegan and also giving you grief about it, and you're the only one. I mean, you'd feel well lost then, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Right, we've got a couple of things to do, but do we need to close down? Because we could do that, because it was just he was saying about refuse to be silenced, which is interesting, because he was saying that trauma tends to silence people, but he says if you can, refuse to be silenced. And his last point was, the graphic footage. He was saying that it's not a good idea. So we've kind of covered his points anyway in that sense. So we could.
I think the most important point is get together with other vegans. And the truth is that when I needed support, I always found support in the vegan community. There are always people there. You have to find them, to find your people. But they're there. So if someone feels alone, they should not despair. There are people, like-minded people, there are friends out there. you can find them. I know I found them, and it has been life-changing.
Well, I suppose it's been quite therapeutic to do this show for us. I suppose, if we've been honest, hasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
I know we've had to put up with each other, which has been a real pain in the arse. But apart from that, right, folks. So sorry about cutting it a little bit short, but we do have to go, I'm afraid. And so thank you so much for tuning in.
Oh, that's a nice comment, Michael. Thank you for all your thank yous, by the way, everyone. It's been really good to know that it's helping, and it's good just to, just chew over some of this stuff, isn't it? And we're all in the same kind of boats.
We're chewing the vegan fat. Can we say that? I suppose we can.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's vegan fat. Right, people. I'm going to say
Take
goodbye.
care of yourself, people.
Everybody wave, and goodbye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.